Hi again. So let's talk about pronunciation. So pronunciation is probably the most complicated of the band descriptors for speaking. It's not worth more than the others. It's 25%, just like the other three criteria. But the number of things that examiners are listening for when you're speaking is quite high. And so like the number of pronunciation features, different pronunciation features that you potentially have to think about and work on is a lot. On the other hand, you can also boil pronunciation down to the simple concept of how clearly you can speak. So how easy is it for someone to understand you? That could be a native English speaker or someone whose first language is not English, but basically it's about the clarity of your spoken language. The band descriptors are also a bit different for pronunciation. So there are set descriptions of pronunciation at bands 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9. And what that means is that if you meet that band, you'll get that score. For the bands in between, bands 3, 5, and 7, it's not a separate band, but what it means is that you've done, like let's say for band 7, you've done all of the things that you need to do to get band 6, and you've done some of the things, but not all of the things that you need to do to get band 8. So it's in the middle. Now, it's really important that you meet all of the criteria for a particular band. So let's say, someone who has got absolutely crystal clear pronunciation of the sounds of English in terms of they might get band 8, and generally they're band 6 in other aspects, but there's some aspect of the language where they're actually band 5. That would result in them getting band 5 because you've got to meet all of the positive criteria to get that band. Now that's pretty unlikely that their pronunciation is going to span 3 different bands, but theoretically that is possible. It just lets you know that the things that you have to focus on, there are a lot of them, and they've all got to be at whatever level that you need. Or if you need band 7, you've got to have a few aspects of your pronunciation that are actually at band 8. You don't necessarily need to worry about all of these things because most people do most of the things of English pronunciation well. And most people will just have 1 or 2 things that they need to improve their score. And essentially, this mostly has to do with how similar or different your language is from English. So if I think of like Dutch is a language which is very similar to English. And the pronunciation features of Dutch are quite similar to those in English. So a Dutch speaker, is quite possible they could get a high score, band 7 or band 8, without actually really having to work on their pronunciation because the languages are so similar. Or, if they do need to work on something, it's relatively minor. Whereas if I think of a language like Vietnamese, which is very, 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 very different from English. So English speakers who try to learn Vietnamese have a really hard time because the sounds in the languages are so different. And generally, Vietnamese speakers have to work really hard to get a high mark in pronunciation because the difference in the languages is so big. So it really depends on your language and your experience speaking to a lesser degree, but really if your language is similar to English, then your English pronunciation will be pretty good. In terms of the features that examiners are listening for, more or less, you can think about the phonemes or the sounds of English. So that has a lot to do with how clear you pronounce the words. So the sounds that you make in English, that's one. Things which are referred to generally as higher features of pronunciation are related to the timing or the rhythm of sentences. So the words which are given more stress in a longer utterance like a sentence, or the syllables which are given more stress in a shorter utterance like a word. That's one aspect. Connected speech, so that's how the sounds in English change based on the sounds that are around them. So if I say something like, I'm going to see him tomorrow, I'm going to see him tomorrow, I might say instead, I'm going to see him tomorrow. I'm going to see him tomorrow. So I'm gonna, or I'm gonna, and then see him becomes see him. I'm going to see him tomorrow. So again, you don't have to do this exactly like I did, but the better your English pronunciation is, the more you will naturally do that. Because the reason pronunciation, the reason that English speakers make those changes is because it's natural for the muscles in the mouth to do that when you put those sounds together. Intonation is another big feature of pronunciation. So intonation is more, it's like, the way that the language goes up and down as you speak. So obvious examples would be something like, really? That's terrible, right? So up, down. But, as you're speaking, the pitch in your voice is going up and down as you speak, according to various principles. Now, let's say English is somewhere in the middle for how up and down the pitch of your voice goes. And if we take a language like Hindi, when I hear that, it seems to go up and down much more than English. Whereas if I listen to a Japanese speaker, the pitch is quite flat in Japanese. So again, if you think like a Hindi speaker will have probably an easier time having more natural sounding intonation because of this, whereas Japanese speakers might have to work a bit harder because their intonation is naturally more flat, so they have to insert and learn about where to put that in. So it doesn't mean they can't do it. Plenty of Japanese speakers have really excellent accents in English, but it's what you need to focus on based on what your language is and what the differences are from English. Speed of how fast you speak is not actually your pronunciation, but it can have a big effect on your pronunciation. So in the following lesson, I'll talk very specifically about that, because that also really depends on what language you speak. Additionally, fluency can have an effect on pronunciation in the sense that for higher level scores like band 7 and band 8, what the examiner is listening for is your ability to use these features of pronunciation, not just a little bit here and there, but over longer stretches of language. So, that's one of the things they're listening for in part 2 when you're speaking for 2 minutes, is sustained use of pronunciation features. Now, of course, if your speech is broken up by a lot of pausing because you're really struggling to speak English, that can have an indirect effect on your pronunciation. So this is why, like in the lesson on fluency, I said fluency can have a positive effect on more than just fluency. And for pronunciation, that's the reason why. Over the 20 years or so I've been teaching, I've come across, maybe a couple of dozen people who speak English with an accent that I'm absolutely sure that they are a native English speaker, and it turns out later that they're not. I'm always curious when I meet these people because it's so rare, and I'll ask them, how did you learn English? And there's one thing that's come up over and over and over, and you would probably think, well, they live in an English-speaking country, and that certainly helps, but not all the people that I've met who lived in English-speaking countries, even for extensive periods of time, sound like that. But the thing that they all had in common is spending a lot of time watching television or watching films. And I don't know why this is. You would think that that would help your listening, which it certainly does, but it has an unbelievably positive effect on your pronunciation and the way that you form the sounds of English and the intonation. Somehow, just like listening to the music of the language as people are speaking it in a television show or in a film, gets into your brain, and over time has a really profound positive effect. So I would recommend that you do that. It's not the kind of thing that's going to have an effect on your pronunciation quickly. Like if your exam is next week, then watch films because you enjoy them or to help you relax, but they're not going to have, an effect on your pronunciation. But over months and years, it can have a really, really positive effect. So that's one thing that you can do. If you need to improve your pronunciation, really the first thing that you've got to do is find out exactly, specifically what the problems you're having are. So nobody has all of the problems. And so, taking a full course in English pronunciation, trying to master every single aspect in an abstract way, outside of normal speaking, you could do it. I know students who have done it. It takes a very long time. But again, a lot of what you're studying is stuff that you do already. And so what you need to do is get feedback about what are the issues that are causing the problem, and then very specifically, what do you need to do about them? So if you have a problem like with a particular sound in English, that often involves identifying, why you can't make that sound or why it's difficult. Probably you don't have it in your language. And then physically what happens to your mouth, inside your mouth with your lips when you make the sound. You'll be doing practice in front of a mirror so you can see that, really focusing on this this aspect of pronunciation. So that's one thing. If your problem is with intonation, again, modeling, listening to people, learning about the basic structure of intonation in English, and then changing that pattern so that it fits. I've had students who, for some reason, at the end of sentences, always English sentences, this is a big generalization, but they tend to go down. And this person was always saying, making them go up. So I really enjoy going to the beach. My favorite sport is football. I really don't like to eat salad, right? So for that person, the exercise they need to do was just to become aware of when they were doing that. They did that by recording themselves and then listening. And then once you're aware, just consciously reversing your intonation. So that's one problem. People who have problems with the sentence rhythm or sentence stress, that can be a huge problem that can lower your score by, 1 band or more. They need to do something different. And so finding out, what your problem is, that's the first thing that you need to do. And then after you know that, you've got to have a plan to work on those specific aspects that you need help in. So there's lots of videos on YouTube and lots of information on the internet, really good information about how to improve your pronunciation, but you really need to be using the specific ones which are designed to help you with whatever issue that you have. Like I said, pronunciation tends to be the most complicated, and so a very careful analysis of what the issue is and how you need to improve it is really important. Finally, if you've done the IELTS test before, and let's say you got band 6.5, that's really frustrating because you don't know what your band scores were for which criteria. So 6.5, you probably got 2 or 3 sevens, but you don't know which were 6, which were 7, and that can make it difficult to know where to improve. So for example, if you get 6 in pronunciation, there could be a very wide variety of reasons why you got 6. Some of them could be very easy to fix, and some of them would take much longer, depending on what the issue is. So thinking about your IELTS band score is helpful in terms of giving a very general idea of where you are. But another reason for getting feedback about your specific pronunciation issues is knowing exactly which criteria or which score, and then for whatever score you have for a particular criteria, what is it specifically which is holding you back from the score that you need? Because if you can't identify that, it makes it really, really, really hard to improve. So, generally, if you just keep speaking, record yourself, listen to yourself, get feedback from a teacher about grammar and vocabulary, eventually you'll get there. So it's not, you don't necessarily have to always do these pinpointed exercises to help you improve, but by doing that, it can be much faster. And most of the people I know who are doing the IELTS test are in quite a big hurry, and so taking away some of the time by being really specific about what you need to improve and working on those things specifically is really helpful.